What's up YouTube? Welcome back to another Friday here on the channel. In today's video, yes, we are doing a tier list, but wait, before you guys click off the video, the tier list is kind of fake. And what I mean by that is, yes, I am going to talk about the legends, their power levels, how they all relate to each other. But what I'm more so using the tier list is as a vehicle or just an excuse to be able to talk about the legends and the decks going into the global release of Riftbound in a more like casual, relaxed setting. I want to be able to talk about the legends. Yes, we'll talk about how strong they are perceived to be, but I also want to talk about like different builds, cool, unique things about the legends, and maybe the decks that go with them, maybe some strengths and some weaknesses, just so I can kind of go over these things with you guys who may be just getting into the game this very week and want to get a quick rundown of the legends, but also just so we can have a discussion. So if you guys are into that kind of thing, definitely subscribe. I've got a lot of really cool videos in the works, especially now that Riftbound is officially releasing globally. I can't freaking wait. But anyways, let's go ahead and get right into this. And we will start with our tier list here. Again, the tier list is kind of fake. The tiers are not meant to be complicated. We're taking it back to grade school. We just got simple A through F. And that bottom row there is just the regular arts, because this tier list that I found had both the regular arts and the alt arts, and I'm gonna put the really cool looking arts in the categories for you guys' viewing pleasure. So all right, let's go ahead and just knock out A tier real quick. We will of course start with Kai'Sa. If you guys haven't been following Riftbound up until this point, the game has released in China, and Kai'Sa won the first 3 regionals, 500 plus players by the way, in China. So many players are alarmed by this, and not for no reason. Kai'Sa is deserving of being in A tier without a shadow of a doubt. I won't quite say it's tier 0 or that it's unbeatable, but the reason that Kai'Sa is so good is because the color combination in tandem with the Legend's ability to pay for power costs just provides the most value in the game in terms of a 40 card deck. Like the cards in red, the cards in blue, they all replace themselves, or they offer insanely strong removal. They're just like really high value cards. It's just a 40 card red blue good stuff deck. So if you didn't know why Kai'Sa was so good and you're just hearing about this for the first time, that's the reason why. That being said, it doesn't do anything too flashy or too unbeatable. It's not like an Aurora deck that has an inevitable win condition. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. Kai'Sa actually has a little bit more room for error when you're playing it, because if you don't have good card game fundamentals, the cards are very, very strong, yes, but they're not broken enough to carry someone who has bad card game fundamentals. So really important things when it comes to playing Kai'Sa well is understanding card economy, understanding trading efficiently. Like if I play a removal spell to kill a unit, am I able to maybe string along some other sort of damage or maybe a more efficient play to kill something? A fantastic example of this is like when your opponent has a 4 might unit in their base, maybe like a Viktor leader, and you as the Kai'Sa player, you're sitting on a falling star. You could just use a falling star and kill the Viktor leader with all 6 of the damage from falling star, but maybe you wait a turn, maybe you wait to see if you can draw a stupefy, or maybe you even chain a smoke screen to the falling star so that you can kill the Viktor leader in base as well as another unit in a battlefield. Just things like that where you're a seasoned card game player and you know how to get the most bang for your buck with these highly efficient cards, because if you start throwing your card economy out the window, you're probably not going to do so well on Kai'Sa. Deck's insane though, in the hands of good players. That's why we're putting it as an easy A tier. And for the other one here, again, if you haven't been following, Master Yi was the other deck in those 3 finals against Kai'Sa. Yes, it did lose 3 times. However, the 4th Chinese regional did feature a Master Yi mirror match. The craziest thing about Master Yi though is that there are now 3 different established builds for what you could face when you sit across from a Master Yi player. There's the OG tried and true, just like sort of aggressive weenie rush, put small units like Stalwart Poro into battlefields, defend it with battle buffs, play low to the ground, play a little bit more basic. That build seems to have been a little bit phased out though. However, I do want to know in the comments below your thoughts and what your favorite Master Yi build is out of the 3 that I'm going to talk about here. The second one is what we saw as an evolution to try to beat Kai'Sa over the course of the 2nd and 3rd Chinese regional. That is a little bit more mid-rangey, but does include some ramp and really kind of capstones around tasty Fey Folk as like a fast accelerate beater that also gives you big benefits when your opponent kills it. So in the case of Kai'Sa, when they kill your Fey Folk, you just get, you know, draws and energy out of it, which is kind of good. But that still wasn't enough to take Kai'Sa out in the finals of that regional. Finally, though, we saw Master Yi dominate with the Dazzling Aurora Master Yi build. I don't think that Master Yi was on many people's radar as a Dazzling Aurora facilitating leader, but really the effect text of Master Yi doesn't matter in terms of the Aurora deck. Like, yes, it's nice and it comes up quite a bit, but really it's the color combination, right? So you've got the orange, of course, where you can play Dazzling Aurora, but really the best thing about it is you have Find Your Center in green, right? And you know, when you're looking at a leader that just kind of stands alone better in a more generic shell of the deck like Dazzling Aurora, you then do have Lee Sin as another green-orange leader, but Lee Sin really wants to be playing units early to get more value out of his legend ability. So Master Yi is a little bit more broadly acceptable when it comes to like a Dazzling Aurora build like that. So yeah, you get the extra ramp from Find Your Center. Of course, you'll have all the ramp that orange provides, like Mobilize, like Catalyst of Aeons. You play Dazzling Aurora ideally on turn 3. And that's a really, really tall order when it comes to the other deck trying to answer that, deal with that, and not let the Aurora players snowball out of control, right? So what are some answers to that? I mean, yellow has the best gear answers in terms of salvage, where you pay 2, it does cost a rune, you kill a gear, you draw a card. So it's the most efficient way of dealing with Dazzling Aurora. So that could be like your Sett decks, that could be maybe like a Darius, and there's not too many other great yellow decks right now, as a little bit of a spoiler for the tier list. But you do also have purple decks that have acceptable losses, and I don't think a lot of the purple decks are playing a ton of gears. There are some builds of Jinx that are a little bit more gear heavy, but if you're playing Annie, for example, acceptable losses seems like a really good tech because you're probably not playing a gear, so the double-sided gear kill doesn't really affect you as much. But yeah, I think that all 3 builds of Yi are pretty strong. I would say probably the lower to the ground, like version 1 type of deck, where you're playing just more of the small units and not much else on top of that, probably more phased out at this point, because like the mid-range ramp build at the very least is still playing like higher body, more high quality units, and really ramping to them is not that difficult of a task to do. Like, you're not even really phased against aggro decks because eventually you'll stabilize and then they can never really beat over your units. And then it's just a matter of like, do you want to play Dazzling Aurora or not? And do you want to kind of go with the RNG of playing it, where like if you don't draw Aurora, you probably just lose, but if you do play it on turn 3, you probably just steamroll all your games. So yeah, that's my spiel about Master Yi, the 3 different builds. While I do think it's cool that there are 3 different builds, you know, the third one is kind of unfortunate and lame to see. I think Dazzling Aurora a little bit too strong when you can play it on turn 3, but it is what it is. So let's start talking about other leaders now. These are the obvious A-tier leaders that are just known to be super, super strong. Let's go ahead and start with Annie. I would say Annie is one of the decks here that does have a lot of hype surrounding it. A lot of people talk about Annie, especially in the Western grassroots tournament scene. It's almost like there's a cult following surrounding Annie, right? And there's a lot of comparisons, obviously, to Jinx. So maybe we can talk about both of these in tandem. As it stands right now, both of these legends are looked at as like red-purple aggressive decks. And you would think that Jinx would be the more effective red-purple aggro deck because it has the ability to replace your hand when you start spamming out your hand onto the board. And obviously there are discard effects in the deck that allow you to get your hand even lower and then draw more cards so you can filter through your deck. But many players are actually defaulting to Annie as the red-purple aggro legend for a few reasons, one of which you get extra runes to play with on your opponent's turn, which helps you be a little bit more defensive, so you're not going all eggs in your basket on just full aggro and not being able to interact with what your opponent's doing in any way, shape, or form. The other thing is you don't have to necessarily play into the low hand theme that Jinx does. And the problem with Jinx's low hand theme is like in the first couple turns, it's actually kind of hard to dump your hand out and get those extra draws from your legend. You have to spend like the first 2 or 3 turns like playing a unit that discards a card, but then your hand is still too big for the legend ability to activate. So Annie doesn't really have to play into that weird sort of theme all the time, and it could be a little bit more flexible and a little bit more generic. Like, yes, Chemtech Enforcer is a strong card when it attacks because of Assault, but no other deck wants to play that card because you're pitching a card in any other deck that isn't Jinx and doesn't actually benefit off that. So when it comes to the power level of these two, I think the perceived way it is Annie would probably be in B, Jinx would probably be in C, kind of lagging behind. However, I am a big fan of Jinx. I just don't think you can play it in much the same way you can play Annie. I think it takes very specific builds of Jinx to really get the most value out of what the legend gives you. So for that reason, I think once Jinx gets a little bit more figured out, I think it's actually going to have a very different identity than Annie. And I think it could potentially be another B tier legend. If it might lag behind Annie, I'm not 100% sure, but if you guys haven't seen my deck profile for Jinx, go check it out. I think that's some of like the different stuff you won't really see in most Annie builds, Sundisk being a really big proponent of that type of build. One of my favorite cards. I'm for sure biased, but I think it's really, really good. I guess maybe next we can jump to Lee Sin, since we already talked about his green-orange counterpart in Master Yi. Lee Sin, I really, really like this leader, but generally it just provides less value than Master Yi does. Think about it this way, right? Lee Sin, you tap itself, you tap one to give a unit a buff. That is a permanent +1 that lasts for as long as the unit sticks around, and it is going to work on offense and defense, whereas Master Yi's ability only really works on defense. But in the cases where Master Yi ability is live versus Lee Sin's ability, there's also some trade-off there, right? Like, you're getting +2 power all the time for defending. It didn't cost you any energy to use that resource. So there's definitely some upside to Master Yi. However, I do think that Lee Sin is not terrible. I mean, if you think about it, it's got the same exact color combination as Master Yi, so it's got access to the same exact main deck cards. At that point, you're just comparing the value of the leader, but you're also looking at the value of Lee Sin's signature spell, Dragon's Rage, which in the right circumstances can serve as pretty insane removal. Like, for a 4-drop with 1 power cost, you can potentially kill 2 units. That's pretty good and almost on par with a card like Falling Star. It's not as easy to use as Falling Star because it does require the 2 units you want to kill being in different locations on the board. So, and it also requires them to have the same power, I guess, or same might. But it can definitely be like a very strong card in the right circumstances. So, I don't know. It's obvious that it's not as strong as Master Yi. I don't think it's quite like trash tier like people say it is, mostly because it has access to the same strong cards that Master Yi has access to. There's also another completely different niche that Lee Sin can fill, which is like the Protect the Castle deck with the Lee Sin Ascetic Chosen Champion. That strategy, though, I think is very, very hard to get off the ground, especially into a Kai'Sa meta. Like, if they see Falling Star, your Lee Sin is just dead. So I do think that there may be a future where this build could be good. It kind of depends, right? So I think that's something we're gonna have to keep an eye on. Unfortunately, I'll have to put my boy in C tier for now, just because I don't see anyone really playing him while Master Yi is a thing. But I do very much like this legend. Let's go ahead and talk about Lux first. Lux is very interesting because I think most people automatically put her into F tier. I do think she has one particular niche, though. I think her one niche is that she is a very removal heavy deck, and Master Yi does not like playing against heavy removal decks. So for that reason, I can almost even see putting her like very low C tier. I don't even think she's that bad into Kai'Sa, to be honest, because at that point you're both just playing like spell efficient removal trade decks. I do think that Kai'Sa's legend ability is going to give you way more value than Lux's legend ability, because, you know, you have to specifically use a high cost spell to draw a card, whereas on every single spell you use, Kai'Sa is going to negate one of those power costs. So yeah, maybe this is a little bit too generous for Lux here, but I do think it has a kind of specific niche if we do see an overly dominated Master Yi format. I should clarify, though, that's if the Master Yi decks are playing like actual units, not just Dazzling Aurora. So that's one important thing to clarify. If that is the case, if it's just Master Yi Aurora everywhere, I think Lux gets a lot worse. So somewhere between here and here, depending on which type of Yi we see going forward. Next up, Garen. I do have to play into the hype on this one. This guy is just like playing Sett without a legend ability. You're forced to overcommit to draw 2 cards. That's the main problem here. If you don't know anything about like efficiently using your cards in card games, you have to put 4 units into a battlefield, and generally in Riftbound you don't want to do that if you don't have to, because your opponent is going to have the opportunity to kill 4 of your units outright. Whereas if you only needed 1 unit to score, you should have only put 1 unit there and, you know, give up that unit for your opponent if you absolutely had to. So yeah, Garen just asking way too much. I can see a universe, however, though, where Garen could be giga broken if we just get like the right types of spammy cards, because like if you can spam a board and it doesn't really cost you anything, and then you put those units in the battlefield and you draw 2, I mean, that can be broken. But we'll see if we actually get those types of spammy cards. I mean, like Vanguard Captain is kind of on that track, although it's not good enough on its own to facilitate the strategy that I'm talking about. But those are the types of cards we'd have to get in like crazy plethora for Garen to be that insane. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll see. Next up is Darius. I've done a lot of Darius content here on the channel. I like the leader a lot. It's a very cool leader. I mean, just by activating Legion, it acts as an extra resource, which is really, really cool. In the beginning of like Riftbound testing season, I was playing a lot of like heavy red Darius instead of the very popular baited hook Darius we see nowadays, and I still really like that deck. It's not quite as strong as like the Kai'Sas of the world, but it is pretty decent to Master Yi because the red version of Darius has a lot of removal. I don't ever really see that build catching on in popularity though, because baited hook is definitely a lot more explosive and has a lot more of a higher ceiling. But with that being said, the brick potential is like out of this world. So ultimately it becomes like a super high roll deck where like if you see all your stuff and baited hook by turn 2, you're off to the races. You're giving any deck in the format a run for its money. But if you don't see baited hook, you're just like a Dazzling Aurora deck, maybe even worse off, where like your strategy just falls apart. And like there's not really any consistent search power for these things. There's no gear searchers, there's no like scry effects except for like Candlelit Sanctum, and you can't play that in every single game of a match. So yeah, Darius, I want to put it in B tier just because like it has the potential to be the strongest deck in the game with all cylinders firing, but it doesn't have the consistency needed to do that all the time. And if it did, I mean, we'd be having a very different discussion of like what's broken in the format. You know, nowadays we're talking about Kai'Sa and Dazzling Aurora. If Darius was more consistent with baited hook, I mean, we'd probably be talking about this deck. It's absolutely insane, but yeah, just not quite consistent enough. Volibear, I think, is a really cool deck. It's like the one intended ramp deck, and then it's kind of weird because every other deck like Master Yi, like Misfortune, that's been popular with Dazzling Aurora, is like seemingly not intended to do that. I know they designed Set 1 to be flexible in that way, where like they want us to find these things like MF Aurora, Yi Aurora. But come on, man, Volibear was meant to do these kinds of things, and he's not bad at it by any means, but he's just not as overpowered with it, because to really get value out of Volibear, you have to play 5 might units and like not as crazy broken units that like the MF Aurora decks and the Yi decks can afford playing while ramping with other insane cards like Find Your Center. Low key, if you guys think that like Dazzling Aurora is a problem, I don't disagree with you, but I think that Find Your Center is actually the culprit card, because that card is way too efficient in terms of ramp and is the reason why Master Yi Dazzling Aurora is like a possible thing. But going back to Volibear, I think it's cool. I think it's just a weaker version of Aurora because you have to play weaker units to actually have a legend ability, whereas again like Yi and MF don't have to do that. So yeah, probably putting the boy Volibear in C tier. I think it can hang, but I don't think it's like the strongest Aurora deck you could be playing. Then we have Ahri. Ahri's a kind of interesting one because she is actually taking advantage of Time Warp. Time Warp is kind of a mind-blowing card, makes you think like, wow, they printed turn skip in Set 1. It's honestly pretty insane. And with the way the game works with the movement mechanic and the holding mechanic, if you have 2 units in battlefields and you activate Time Warp and then you take your extra turn, you just score 2 points for free. So like, kind of weird that such a strong card exists in Set 1 and that it's so non-interactive. The only thing that can really stop it is like either Mystic Reversal or Wind Wall in green. That's literally the only thing that can stop it. Besides that, like if you play properly or have the ability to play well, you can just stop them from holding battlefields. Like if you just can't put up a fight and they can do that, yes, they're going to run away at the game. But you guys might have saw like in my recent gameplay video where, you know, I wasn't really allowing Ahri to keep a lot of its units alive, and that was making Time Warp just have a lot less value. So that's the kind of thing you're aiming to do against the strategy, but it's still mind-blowing that Time Warp is being printed in Set 1. However, this deck did manage to top 8 the most recent Chinese regional, I do believe. So I think people are figuring out the strengths of Ahri a little bit more. And it's a very comparable legend to Master Yi, right? Because Master Yi buffs your units when your opponent attacks into them, and Ahri decreases the might of your opponent's units when they attack into you. It's just a matter of by how much, right? Master Yi requires you to defend alone, but you get a +2 buff. Ahri only gives a -1 debuff, but if they attack with multiple units, you are kind of then matching what Master Yi is giving you, right? And then at that point, you're trading off the orange color for the blue color, and I think blue is super strong, like Thousand Tail Watcher, quite possibly the best unit in the entire game. So trading off orange for blue and getting access to Watcher, not a bad thing at all. Like I would definitely put Ahri probably in B tier, maybe even above Darius, just because like again Darius requires that high roll potential. And then I'd probably do something like this where I would move Ahri and Darius over to the left above Annie and Jinx here. Yasuo, There's kind of two schools of thought with Yasuo. There's obviously like the point score movement combo where you play purple Yasuo plus ride the wind, try to score points and cheese wins that way. I think that deck has a lot of weaknesses, the main one being that like purple Yasuo just dies to everything. It dies to the wind being blown the wrong way, which is funny because he's Yasuo, he like controls the wind or whatever. But there are some other Yasuo builds popping up that are just a bit more like good green purple card dot deck, and that's funny to say because purple doesn't have a lot of like the best cards in the game. You have some cool ones like stack deck and ride the wind. There are some very strong cards in the color for sure, but I'm a little bit more interested to see what that deck can do, and I do like the idea of being able to play both Poros and Poro Herder, because Poro Herder in theory seems like an insane 2-drop or a turn 2 play where you played a Poro on turn 1. Generally both of the green and purple Poro are good turn 1 plays, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, Poro Herder drawing a card, replacing itself, costing a power is kind of rough, but I wonder if like just a good card dot Yasuo deck could do some things here. So yeah, for now probably throw it in D tier. I don't know if anything is actually as bad as Garen, so Garen might just be alone in F tier, but that's what it is for now. Next up we have Leona. Leona is cool because she can also play both Poros. However, I don't think that really coincides with like the stun buff stuff you want to be doing. I think Leona's problem is you need to dedicate so much room in your deck to the stun mechanic, where like you can't just play the generic good cards that a lot of like other green and yellow decks have access to. And if you don't dedicate as much stuff to the stun mechanic, you don't have a legend ability most of the time. The other issue is like stun is so hyper specific where like you only get value out of it if it's in battle, where like you look at a leader like Kaisa, you get value out of it every single turn. You look at a legend like Ahri, you get value out of it every single turn. Even Darius, almost every single turn you get value out of it. And with Leona, it's very specific. There's not a lot of stuff that stuns in base, but even if there was, like, you don't always care to be stunning things in base because stun is a combat based keyword. So it's kind of weird. I throw it in D tier again. I do think it's got to be better than Garen, but yeah, still a rough one to really try and play with. Teemo, I'm a huge fan of Teemo. Teemo did top 8 the first ever Chinese regional alongside the Yis and the Kaisas of the world. I do think builds are still being figured out. There was a time period where I thought that Nocturne was a bit overhyped, but nowadays I think like to keep up with the top decks, you kind of want to be playing for the kind of RNG high roll of Nocturne, because getting free bodies is good. It's just like when you draw Nocturne, it kind of feels particularly bad. But yeah, like I said, I think you need the momentum and the high roll to kind of keep up with the top decks at their best. So I would throw it in B tier, probably above Darius, just because Teemo's a lot more consistent. So yeah, seems good there. And that actually reminds me, wait till we get a yellow purple deck that can play stack deck, because that's going to be potentially a very nutty baited hook deck, because stack deck will make your deck much more consistent. All right, next up is Viktor. Viktor is very interesting because it was one of the most highly played decks in all of the Chinese regionals, and it had by far the most abysmal conversion rate, to where I think a lot of people think the deck is completely fraudulent and would put it down here in F tier. However, I do have slightly higher hopes for Viktor. One of those reasons being like it is pretty good into Dazzling Aurora, because you have guaranteed bodies that can score before Aurora can potentially take off. The other thing is, I think that playing into the quote-unquote Monarch build that I showcase here on the channel is actually good. I think that like playing cards like Cruel Patron is very strong. I think it's an overstated card. Being at 6 might, it does die to some particular things like Singularity and Falling Star if your opponent really wanted to drop an entire Falling Star on it. But I also think Commander Ledros has legs to stand on. Like, there are certain game states where if you have Ledros in play, your opponent's only out is Thousand Tail Watcher, and if you have Hidden Blade, I mean, Thousand Tail Watcher just doesn't really do anything. So yeah, I think that Viktor has some legs to stand on. I just think people need to try being a little bit more exploratory in their builds. So for that reason, I personally think it's worth going in A tier. This is again like the Viktor and the Jinx, those are more of like my internal testing, not like I would say the widely perceived strength of these decks, but that's what I have to say about it, at least. Then there is Misfortune. Misfortune, I think in recent days would be somewhere up in like high B tier, but I think it's just been generally dethroned as the Aurora deck of the format. I think if you're playing Aurora, you're probably just leaning towards Master Yi. There are going to be people who really like Mind Splitter as a card and want to be toxic, and I'm using toxic facetiously, but yeah, they're gonna want to rip cards out of the opponent's hand and do things like that. They'll play Misfortune for that reason because of the purple cards they have access to, but I don't think it's going to be quite as strong as Master Yi. One thing I really want to talk about here though is the Pack of Wonders Treasure Trove combo. This is something that people saw early on and they were like, holy cow, this is insane. We have like an actual nasty draw engine, but pulling that combo off in the first 2 turns, I've done the math many times. It's extremely inconsistent. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I know it's a sub 40% chance of actually pulling it off by turn 2. That's even if you account for things like stack deck on turn 1 and other crazy things like that. So yeah, not super consistent. I think Yi Aurora is probably just better, but it is what it is. And then we are leaving the best for last. Not the best deck in the game, obviously, but Sett, one of my favorite characters in all of League of Legends. Very strong deck. I think people oftentimes talk about it as like a triangle with Kai'Sa, Yi, and Sett. While it is true that on paper, Sett beats Kai'Sa because it protects from ability destruction, Sett has its own problems. One of those things being draw power. Not many cards in orange or yellow replace themselves. That's a really big problem. So as soon as you start playing multiple units to the board, you immediately start dwindling your hand like crazy. And also, rune management is very hard with this deck. Like, many of the units you want to be playing have power costs, and then your legend ability also requires power. So while I think Sett has a lot of really good things going for it, I think more often than not, it kind of just loses to itself, and it requires you to play very differently than you would typically play Riftbound. So for that reason, I would keep it in B tier as well, maybe above Teemo. And I think something like this makes a lot of sense. Like, you got Kai'Sa and Yi in A tier, you've got Ahri, you got Sett, Teemo in B tier, and then Darius being like the gatekeeper of true B tier. Maybe Annie just lagging right behind that in terms of like wide community perception. Viktor and Jinx, these are my own thoughts on what I've been testing for these leaders. And again, I've been playing builds that are very outside the norm that I think are kind of strong. C tier, this seems fair to me. I mean, you've got Lee Sin, who has the same colors as Master Yi, just sometimes a worse leader ability. You've got Volley, who could play Aurora, just does a little bit worse. You've got MF, who plays Aurora, just does a little bit worse. MF is probably slightly above Volibear here. And then for our D tier, we do have Lux, who has maybe a niche in the meta. Again, she's maybe creeping up to C if everything is like mid-range Master Yi. And then we have Yasuo, which remains to be seen, a good Leona list, which remains to be seen, and Garen, which is just playing the game on extra hard mode, new game plus. So yeah, I think this is pretty fair, and I kind of enjoyed this video, just being able to talk about these things a little bit more casually, just give my thoughts on different strategies, different things in the Set 1 format. If you guys enjoyed it, let me know. Definitely drop a like, a comment, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more Riftbound content, and I will see you guys in the next one.